If you watch this all the way through, you will understand why an entire generation operates on a completely different frequency than everyone else. Right now, while boomers post minion memes and Gen Z argues about everything online, there's this massive group of people who just quietly run the world without saying a word about it. Generation X, born somewhere between 1965 and 1980. They re the coworkers who never need supervision. The parents who seem strangely calm during actual emergencies. The people who built your favorite childhood technology, but wouldn't dream of live streaming their lives. And according to recent behavioral psychology research, their entire operating system was coded by an experience no other living generation shares. Let's start with something that defined their psychology more than anything else: the empty house. It's 1979. You're 9 years old, school just ended. You walk home, pull a key from your backpack, unlock the door, and step into complete silence. No parent, no babysitter, no adult checking if you made it safely. You were just alone. Data from the Census Bureau shows that by 1983, over 8 million American children between ages 5 and 14 were coming home to empty houses every single day. That wasn't considered neglect, that was just Tuesday. These kids learned something fundamental about existence that later generations simply didn't. Nobody's coming. Figure it out yourself, keep yourself alive, and that rewired everything. Here's what's actually happening in the brain of someone raised this way. Neuroscientists at the University of Michigan studied adults who experienced prolonged childhood self-supervision during the 1970s and 80s. They found something remarkable. These individuals developed enhanced executive function in their prefrontal cortex, specifically in areas governing self-regulation and consequence prediction. When you were 8 years old and you were hungry, but there's no adult to feed you, your brain has to activate planning circuits that normally wouldn't develop until much later. That's not childhood. That's survival training disguised as a normal afternoon. Gen X didn't just develop self-reliance. They developed what researchers now call contingency hypersensitivity. Every action had an immediate, observable consequence. You forgot your lunch. You went hungry. Nobody delivered it to school. You broke something. You fixed it or faced punishment. A 2024 study from Yale found that adults raised in high-contingency environments process risk assessment fundamentally differently. They were always calculating, always 3 moves ahead, not because they were paranoid, but because their childhood taught them that consequences are real, immediate, and nobody's going to protect you from them. Now let's talk about what psychologists call institutional trust erosion. Gen X watched their parents build their entire identities around corporate jobs, believing the system would take care of them. Then came the 1980s, mass layoffs, pension funds disappearing, companies that promised lifetime employment suddenly deciding that loyalty was a one-way street. When you were 10 and you watch your father get fired after 20 years of dedication, your brain doesn't process that as an economic event. It processes it as proof that the rules are lies. Research from the University of Pennsylvania shows that Gen X exhibits significantly lower baseline institutional trust than any generation before or after. They don't expect corporations to care. They don't expect the government to help. They don't expect promises to hold. And that's not pessimism. That's pattern recognition trained by direct observation. Here is something most people completely miss about Gen X: their relationship with privacy isn't preference. It's protective instinct. They grew up in the last era where mistakes just disappeared. You did something embarrassing. Maybe 5 people saw it. Maybe they told 5 others, and then it was gone. No video, no screenshots. No permanent digital record that follows you forever. The entire concept of broadcasting your personal life to strangers doesn't register as connection to them. It registers as vulnerability. A 2025 study on generational privacy attitudes found that Gen X reports the highest levels of discomfort with digital exposure. Not because they don't understand technology, but because they understand exactly what happens when people know too much about you. You become a target. And let's be honest about something nobody wants to acknowledge. Gen X turned irony into armor because sincerity was dangerous. They grew up during the Cold War, when adults casually discussed nuclear annihilation like it was weather. Elementary school teachers had them practice duck and cover drills for bombs that would vaporize them instantly. Think about what that does to a developing mind. The adults in your life are simultaneously telling you that everything is fine while also preparing you for the end of the world. Cognitive dissonance becomes your baseline. You learn to hold contradictory truths simultaneously. Hope for the best. Expect obliteration. Laugh at both, because if you take it seriously, the weight will crush you. But here's what makes Gen X fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Despite all this self-reliance, despite all this armor, they developed what researchers call selective deep loyalty. They don't trust institutions. But if you prove yourself as an individual, if you demonstrate actual competence rather than performing it, they'll follow you through fire. This comes from forming intense friendships born from necessity. When your parents weren't home and you needed someone, you built tight networks with other kids in the same situation. Those bonds were different, forged in actual need rather than social convenience. Gen X1T announced they were there for you. They'll just show up at 3 in the morning with tools and no questions asked. Now here's where Gen X psychology reveals something about work that every other generation misses. They watch boomers give everything to companies that discarded them. So Gen X doesn't believe in company loyalty. But they are obsessively loyal to their own skill set. They can control whether they get laid off. But they can control whether we're the most valuable person in the building when layoffs come. This created what organizational psychologists call competence-based security seeking. They were not trying to climb the corporate ladder for status. They were trying to become too useful to eliminate. And that shapes everything about how they work. No drama, no self-promotion, just relentless execution that makes them difficult to replace. Here is something that explains so much about Gen X behavior. They have a deeply complicated relationship with authority that stems directly from watching authority figures fail catastrophically throughout their childhood. Watergate taught them presidents lie. The Iran-Contra affair taught them the government operates in shadows. The AIDS crisis taught them that institutions will let people die rather than admit uncomfortable truths. A Gen Ser will follow someone with actual expertise anywhere. But if you read just someone with a fancy position who clearly doesn't know what you read doing, they have negative patience. They've seen too many incompetent authority figures make terrible decisions while demanding obedience. Let's talk about something researchers call economic trauma accumulation. The oldest Gen Sers were hitting their professional stride when the dot-com bubble burst in 2000. The youngest ones graduated college right into that collapse. Then 2008 destroyed everything again. Then the 2020 pandemic hit right when they were supposed to be reaching peak earning years. They've been economically gut-punched repeatedly at every major life milestone. A 2023 study from the Federal Reserve found that Gen X has accumulated significantly less wealth than previous generations had at the same age, despite working longer hours. And it created this survival response, where they diversify income streams, not because they were entrepreneurial, but because they've learned that nothing is stable. But here's the part that rarely gets discussed. Gen X struggles with what psychologists identify as hyper-independence to the point of relational difficulty. They are incredibly capable in crisis situations, but that capability often comes from an unwillingness to depend on anyone else. Data from the Journal of Adult Development shows that Gen Sers report the lowest rates of seeking social support during major stressors. Not because they don't have people they could ask, but because asking feels like fundamental failure. This is the dark side of being raised to handle everything alone. You become so competent at self-rescue that you forget how to let others help. And that creates this weird isolation, where they are surrounded by people but still fundamentally alone because they allow vulnerability. Here's the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. Generation X might be the last generation that truly understands what silence sounds like, what boredom feels like, what it means to solve a problem without being able to search for the answer. They re not better than other generations. They re just calibrated differently. Shaped by a specific historical moment when the old world was collapsing, and the new one hadn't arrived yet. They built the digital age, but they remember analog. They understand connection, but they value independence. They re capable of intense loyalty, but they expect nothing in return. The next time you encounter someone who seems oddly calm during chaos, who fixes things without asking for help, who never posts about their achievements, but somehow gets everything done, you re probably looking at Gen X. They re not showing off. They re not hiding. They re just operating on that frequency they learned as kids. The one that says nobody's coming to save you. So you better save yourself. And maybe that's the most Gen X thing possible. Doing the work without needing credit for it. Because credit does pay the bills, competence does. If you found yourself nodding along to this, you need to understand why some people seem to need absolutely nothing from anyone else. That's where the psychology gets even more complex. Because extreme self-reliance isn't strength. Sometimes it's a wound pretending to be armor. Psychology Unpacked. See you in the next Unpack.